Okay, everyone, thanks for coming to our chapter engagement sessions for today. And today is an important one, right? All of them are important, but this one is really important. This is that activity that's in the Discover star of the 5-star chapter plan that you've heard, we've reformatted and is out and about. And it's that last piece, and we hope that among all of the other things that you can get from Honors in Action, you'll definitely earn that 5th star for your chapter. So thanks for joining us today. I'm gonna share my screen and then introduce you to our esteemed Associate Vice President of Honors Programming and Undergraduate Research, Dr. Susan Edwards, also known lovingly as the Queen of Honors in Action, right? So like yesterday, we were talking to the regional officers, and I said, the first thing you need to do when you get that honors program guide is read that essay, right? And it kind of frames everything for you. The topic, it gives you ideas, it gives you those moments where, oh, you know what? That's really interesting what Susan said. I think I want to know more about it. And so it's always great. Of course, it's great to work with Susan, but it's always great to hear her talk to our students and our chapters and our advisors about Honors in Action. So with all that being said, Susan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Patty, and thank you everybody for being here. Patty and I were just talking that for some reason today feels like a Monday for us, and so I hope you're having a wonderful day and a wonderful week. And I do know it's Wednesday, so it's halfway through, a little more than halfway through the week, and it's been a good one so far. So made better because you are here, and we're going to talk about Honors in Action and getting started with Honors in Action. I know some of your chapters may be well into the process. Some of your chapters may have started a little bit this summer, and then some of your chapters may be starting now or a little maybe next month. All of them are okay with Honors in Action. Let's go to the next slide. Do a couple of basics about this.
Sorry about that.
There you go. That as long as you're finished by December 31st, 2023, you're golden. So that's what you want to keep in mind as you're working on Honors in Action. One of the basic things is that the project should be completed sometime between January 1st and December 31st of the year. 1 or 2 members is all it takes. We hear a lot, well, we don't have a big team. That's okay. Honors in Action can be done by a small team. In fact, it can be done exceedingly well by a small team. Taking the Honors in Action process one step at a time. It's all about the process. I'm going to talk more about that. And so it doesn't have to be the biggest project. It doesn't have to be the sexiest project. It does have to be a project that follows that process that we're going to talk about. Then the really cool thing, some of you come from chapters that have done Honors in Action really well, or regions. I noticed as people were coming in, we've got some regional coordinators here. Some of you come from regions where a lot of chapters do exceedingly well with Honors in Action. But some of you may be in chapters who really haven't done a project before or haven't done well. The really nice thing is by you being interested in this and working on a project, you're going to lay the foundation for the next team to know how to do it. They're going to be able to say, yes, we've actually done an Honors in Action project. And that's very exciting for us. Then Patty already mentioned that doing an Honors in Action project earns you that in that 5-star chapter range, that to be in the 5-star Discover part of the 5-star chapter plan. You do an Honors in Action project. There's lots to discover with Honors in Action. And then I'm going to talk about the process and thinking about this holistically, because I want you to think about the Honors in Action process holistically from the very beginning when you open that Honors Program Guide to the very end when you click Submit on or before January 17th, 2024. So those are the things, the basic things to keep in mind. Let's talk about Honors in Action and getting started. Go to the next slide, please. I
Sorry.
always want to be, no worries. I always want to be in this image with those girls because they look like they're having a great time. They're playing, right? So Honors in Action is a holistic process. We really want you to follow the process. It's intentional, informed service based on Phi Theta Kappa's honor study topic. So if you keep that in mind, it's part of the second part of Phi Theta Kappa's mission, but intentional informed service, the foundation of which is Phi Theta Kappa's honor study topic. Follow the honors program guide. We have the guide. I'm going to bring up a couple of parts of the guide there, but we have an introduction to the honor study topic. We have introductions to each of the 7 themes in this current honor study topic. We've got all sorts of materials that can help you do things like develop a research question and consider academic resources and all the parts of Honors in Action. We don't want it to be mysterious. We're here to help. We have resources to help you. And so take a look at that honors program guide and work through that. That's going to help. We also have an Honors in Action planning rubric. And the nice thing about this, it will tell you exactly what we're looking for in an Honors in Action project, and it assigns points to that. It's the same rubric that Honors in Action Hallmark Award entry judges look at when they score your entries. So it's really nice to start with the end in mind and to see that rubric, to know what the judges are looking for. You can also find the rubric in pages 24 through 26 of the Honors Program Guide. What you'll see there are only the top points for every category, because you're Phi Theta Kappa members and officers and advisors and regional coordinators, and you want to be in that top range. So take a look. You can see the rubric online at the Hallmark Awards page, or you can see it in the Honors Program Guide, but use it. It's really important. And then we want you to keep a journal throughout the process, so you remember why you made the choices you made. For example, how you followed the process, what steps did you take, what were your sources, and what are the APA citations for your sources. So you're not thinking about that in January, you're thinking about it as you go through, and you're writing those things out. You know, journals can take all kinds of forms. Those can be done electronically, they can be old school. You can get a journal that's a physical journal for each person. You want to make sure that more than one person on the team has access to the journal and the materials. And I'm going to recommend making sure that your chapter advisor has access to it as well, because things happen and it's a team project. You want to make sure people have that information. But the journaling information becomes really important toward the end of the process, when you don't have to remember everything. You can look back at your notes and you can see, here's what we did, here's why we did it. You know, here's what's connected to the Honors in Action rubric. So, you know, make sure that you're taking notes, however you want to take those, save them, however you want to save them so that the team can see it. And then remember that you're studying the honor study topic. Phi Theta Kappa has a biennial honor study topic. It is the foundation of Honors in Action. We're going to talk a little bit more about the honor study topic, but the overall honor study topic is the foundation. The theme that you select is the lens through which you study the honor study topic. It's always important to remember when you're starting the process of Honors in Action, and really throughout the process. Let's go to the next slide and leave those fun-loving little girls. All right, here's the whole process on one slide, so you see it. I know that the print's a little bit smaller than the other slides, but I wanted you to see that it's a completely doable process. And you really want to go step by step and follow this process. So you start with investigating and analyzing the honor study topic. You're going to review the honors program guide. You want to set some research objectives. I'll talk a little bit more about that, because that's something the chapters are getting a lot better at. I'm really thrilled about that. But some chapters still aren't setting those research objectives. And so I want to make sure that you know what those look like. You want to develop a research question, something that's going to guide your research. You know, what is it about the theme as it's connected to the honor study topic do you want to know? That's going to become your research objective. your research question. Then you're going to identify and analyze academic sources. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the fact that what the Honors Program Council, the team that puts this together, calls inspiration sources, things that help you think about what you'd like to do, versus academic sources, which are the ones that ultimately you want to use for an honors in action project. So you're going to use, you can use both kinds of sources, but you really need to look at academic sources during the process. We'll talk more about that. And then you're going to develop research conclusions. And that can be a little bit tough for students too, I think, or chapters. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the kinds of questions you can ask yourselves as you're working on developing research conclusions. So it will help you. When you look at the Honors in Action rubric, you're going to see that 34 points are assigned to the investigation and analysis part of this, the academic investigation. Keep in mind when you look at that rubric that there are many more points than 34 that are connected to the academic investigation of the honor study topic. There are points assigned in the other parts of the rubric for that. So it's just what the Honors Program Council calls a pro tip. Look at the rubric as it relates to academic investigation, but look at the rubric as it relates to the other two pieces of honors in action, and just suss out those places where you really need to be thinking about the honor study topic as you're working. So once you develop your research conclusions, you can move on to strategize and lead. This is the action part of honors in action. Sometimes chapters will think, well, the action part is the project. It's not, it's a piece of the project. So the project is the entire process, but the action part, of course, is an important part of the project, and it can be a lot of fun. You want from your research conclusions to identify a real world problem. It's something that during the process of your research, you'll look at in a global way, but most chapters work locally. That's what we expect. And so, you may look at how the real world problem manifests itself globally, but look at it also in your community, and how that real world problem is something that you can address. There may be some problems that are already addressed really well in your community. So you want to make sure that you have an opportunity for short-term impact and potential for long-term impact, but short-term impact because you're working on the project for a relatively short period of time. And that's very likely in your community. Just like you set research objectives, you want to set measurable action and collaboration objectives. So there, again, as you're working through this process, we do want chapters to work with people on campus who are not part of Phi Theta Kappa and people from the community. So you want collaborators, you want them on campus, and you want some from the community. This is really great for the project because you can have all sorts of coaches. Your chapter advisors, of course, are coaches for you, but other faculty or staff on campus can be coaches, community members can be coaches who can help you work through this process and enhance and develop your skills. We don't expect you to go into this process knowing how to do everything. We know your honor students, you're wonderful, Phi Theta Kappa students are. We know your chapter advisors are wonderful, but I like to think of it, I'm going to use the baseball analogy, and a lot of you know that I love sports, but I love baseball. And since football season hasn't quite started yet, I usually use a football analogy. I'll use baseball. All the players on my home team, I live in Houston, so the Astros, don't hate, but the Astros are all good baseball players. I mean, they are part of a major league team because they know how to play baseball. That's like you with academic investigation. But they don't just show up without doing any work before they get to the ballpark. They have a manager, they have coaches, they have assistant coaches, they have nutritionists, they have all sorts of people who are helping them to develop and hone their skills to get better. That's what we want for you through Honors in Action. So don't be afraid to ask questions, to ask for help, to ask people who have expertise on campus or in the community to help you with your project. That's the way you're going to learn. That's hopefully going to enhance your project. It'll be better than it would have been without the collaborators. And so you want to identify, have collaboration objectives. As one of those objectives, an Honors Program Council pro tip, make sure you have a plan of communication with your collaborators. So one of the things the rubric asks about is how you communicated with your collaborators. You want to make sure you've got that plan of action. And then you want a plan of action just for the action part of your project in general. So you can, what steps you need to finish this part of the project. And then of course, you're going to identify the collaborators and execute your plan. Then the third part of Honors in Action is the assessment and reflection piece of Honors in Action. So if you think of this as a service learning process, in addition to an Honors in Action process, it's all about thinking about, well, how did you do with your research? What did you learn? You know, how did things go? I mean, did they go well? And so you learned a lot from the execution of your plan, the planning and execution of it. Did some things go wrong? You know, that happens in projects. So what did you learn from that if they went wrong? And so you want to think about it. You want to really reflect throughout the process. And so as I'm mentioning this as the third piece of this, it is the third part of the rubric, but you want to make sure that your team's thinking about how the project's going and what you're doing and how you can maybe do better. And if things go wrong, or say you've researched something and it turns out to be not what you want to do, so how do you pivot? How do you go ahead and do something a little bit different? It happens all the time. It's not a linear process. And so remember to take those notes as you do this. You want to identify how members grew as scholars and leaders, because Honors in Action is tied to the second part of Phi Theta Kappa's mission to provide opportunities for college students to grow as scholars and leaders. You want to tell us how the team grew as scholars and leaders, and be specific. You want to think about how you develop skills, how you hone skills, how the collaborators helped you with those things, how your chapter advisors and the coaches helped you with those. And then of course you want to write, edit, and submit your Honors in Action Hallmark Award entry. And notice that you've got write, edit, and submit. Probably the submit is the easiest part of that whole thing. It's clicking a button, but you want to give yourself some time as a team to write, and especially give yourself time to edit the Honors in Action Hallmark Award entry, because 6 of the 100 points awarded for Honors in Action Hallmark Award entries come from grammar and spelling. So there are lots of ways to help you with those kinds of things. But again, if you think of this as a holistic process, don't forget to have time on your timeline to get those things done. So let's go to the next slide, please. So research objectives, I mentioned that these are getting better and better. It's very exciting, but sometimes chapters forget to have some research objectives. So you really want 3 to 5 of those, ideally. Sometimes there are fewer, sometimes chapters have a lot more, but 3 to 5 makes a lot of sense. They need to be measurable. So you want to make sure that you can measure at the end of the process or throughout the process how you're doing with your objectives. If you're not sure how to set smarter goals, how to measure objectives, that's where those coaches come in, right? It may be your chapter advisor, it may be somebody else on campus, but get help as you set these goals and as you get ready to measure them. So here are some, possibilities of research objectives. These are not the ones you have to use. It's really just to give you some examples. So one goal might be to secure a copy of the APA 7th edition manual for the chapter's use. That will make your life a lot easier when you're trying to do APA citations, so that you get them completely right. And I should mention, because we have Honors in Action grants available, and I'll mention again that the deadline's September 14th, but purchasing a copy of the manual can be something that you apply for in the Honors in Action grant. You can include that among the things you'd like to do with funds. So another objective might be to recruit 3 or 4 members to serve on the chapter's honors and action team. Again, you need, a team of 2, but you may have an objective to try to get more members of it. That's up to you. Another objective might be to invite the college's research librarian to conduct training on finding and analyzing academic sources. Don't forget your research librarians. They are invaluable for honors and action. They know their stuff. They know databases. They know how to find things. They know what it means to have an academic resource. So, have them as collaborators if they're not already your chapter advisors. I know there are research librarians who are chapter advisors as well. All right, let's go to the next slide. So here is the honor study topic. I know you knew this, but I wanted to wait a little bit in the process. Our 2022-2023 honor study topic is the art and science of play. So we're in the 2nd year of the topic. There are 7 themes, and you probably know those well by now, but everything from the essence of play to play it forward. I'm going to mention with play it forward, it's especially important to know that it does not mean pay it forward. So here's how you know. Those white questions that are written out, those are the overarching questions for each theme. So for the essence of play, theme 1, it's what are the natural and philosophical foundations of play? I'll go back to theme 7, how can the experience of play serve as a catalyst for epiphanies, innovations, and inventions? All of these questions are really important. You can find them. There's the lovely image of the honors program guide. You may have a hard copy of it, but you can also find it at ptk.org/honors. And the guide is really an important tool. So I urge you, if you haven't done it, to get that. But you can find each of these themes and each of the overarching questions in the guide. There's an introduction page for each one of the themes. Pay attention, overarching question. That will tell you if you are in the right theme. So if you're looking at the natural and philosophical foundations of play, for example, and you're connecting that, it's your lens through which you're studying the art and science of play, you are probably dealing with something that has to do with the natural world or the philosophical world. If you're not, it may be one of the other themes. It doesn't mean you have to get rid of your research. It just means that you have to look at, maybe you need to be in one of the other themes. So pay attention to them. They're going to help you a lot. And the Honors Program Council worked really hard on these, and they're proud of them. So look at those questions for that as well. Know that during the process, you can move themes. It's okay to do that. You want to be in the right theme, the theme where you're answering that question in some way. And that's really important. Let's go to the next slide. So I mentioned that I'd say the difference between inspiration sources and academic sources. All of us use inspiration sources all the time. I know if I'm watching television or I'm working on something and I don't know the definition of a word, or I'm thinking, well, when was that person born, or what's the context of something I'm reading, I pick up my phone and I start Googling. That's inspiration, right? I mean, I'm looking for the answers, but it's not an academic source. I might actually look at Wikipedia to see, and then we'll move on to other sources. That's true for Honors in Action of newspaper articles, popular magazines, websites, TED Talks, informal surveys or interviews, films. They're all wonderful sources. They're just not academic sources. So your team can use these. We expect that every team will use them. You're going to get your inspiration from somewhere. When I talk about the honor study topic, typically, I talk about what's in the news. I'm not talking about academic sources. I'm just talking about where the art and science of play is. A hint, it's everywhere, that you probably can see if you're looking at the honor study topic. But please feel free to use these. I mentioned that they're inspiration sources and not academic sources because you want to move from the inspiration sources to the academic sources. And the academic sources are the ones that will build the foundation for your research conclusions and for what becomes your action. So these are great. Newspaper articles, by the way, when you're working through this, you can use those to do an honors case study challenge. And I'll mention the case study again at the end. But there's something you can do with these inspiration sources besides having inspiration. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So academic sources are different. You need to use at least 8 academic sources, or I shouldn't say at least, 8 academic sources. Now, they're clearly academic publications, and those are journals. Those are things that have been vetted. They might be books by scholars. They might be books by serious journalists. You can tell sometimes by looking up and seeing, are there footnotes? Are there sources cited so that you could actually go to some of the sources and take a look at them? Those can be there. Let's see, what educators, local class. Okay, that's a great question, is whether people with academic degrees. Here's the deal with academic interviews and with surveys. In the academic world, there are very specific things you have to do with interviews and surveys. So the academic isn't about who you're interviewing, because people who aren't academics can have expertise. But an academic interview or a survey, with an academic interview, for example, you have to write and vet the questions, make sure that they meet the criteria for academic interviews. Are they open-ended? Are they not leading? What you want to have somebody take a look at the questions. And then when you do the interview, typically academic interviews would last about 60 minutes. Then they need to be recorded. They need to be transcribed. They need to be coded. They need to be analyzed. You're probably thinking, oh, that's a lot of work. And yes, it is. So it could be that that you talk to somebody with an advanced degree as an inspiration source, or that person might help you with the action part of the Honors in Action project. If you're going to do the academic interview, make sure you get training for how you do it and that you follow the steps. Surveys are the same way. There's a specific protocol for doing academic surveys. They're different from evaluation surveys, and a lot of chapters do evaluation surveys. Those just aren't part of your 8 sources. I hope that makes sense. I'm happy to answer questions if it doesn't make sense, because I want to make sure that it's clear. The interviews and surveys, if you do them as academic interviews and surveys, would have to have been conducted in the past year. So again, you can do surveys and you can do interviews as inspiration sources, and that might be the easiest way to go if you're really interested in the academic protocols and process for these things. That may be where you get some coaches and have them help you through the process. There's lots to learn, and it can be really fascinating to do those things. It's probably a little easier, maybe a lot easier, to find journal articles and books and other types of academic sources that research librarians and chapter advisors can help you find. So that would probably be my recommendation, but I'm happy to talk with anybody who's interested in the protocols for academic interviews and academic surveys. You do want to make sure that your sources represent clearly different points of view. It doesn't mean that they have to be diametrically opposed, but they do have to be different points of view. They have to bring things to the table, and that they're wide ranging. So in other words, none of us loves when we have to look at things that countermand what we already believe. But in Honors in Action, you really, really want to look at sources that may, in fact, support what you already believe, but you need to look at those sources who maybe challenge your thinking a little bit and what you believe already. So you want to make sure that among those 8 sources that you've got wide-ranging sources. You can use more than 8. You will need 8 for the Honors in Action Hallmark Award entry, which is the last step in Honors in Action. And so you want to make sure that they're academic sources for those 8. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so here are some qualities. How do you tell if a source is academic? Well, I already mentioned that it's presented or published by an author with expertise and credentials in the field of study. They're in peer-reviewed venues. You can tell when something's been peer-reviewed. These aren't self-published sources, journal articles, or books. You want to steer clear. Self-published works can be inspiration sources, but they're not academic sources. You want to make sure, again, there are clear references, clear documentation, so that you know where the authors got the information. And that should be in any of the academic sources. And so you might look at published literature reviews, which are always really wonderful if you're trying to really get a sense of the scope of ideas about a topic. You might look at published research, quantitative or qualitative or archival research. You might look at a dissertation or a thesis or a book published through a university press. All of those things tend to be academic sources and can be really valuable. With any of these things, take a look at the footnotes, take a look at the endnotes, take a look at what the authors are saying about their sources, because you'll find other sources that way. That can be really helpful in your search. So take a look at what the authors looked at, and then you can find that information. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so some more about academic sources. Here are some questions you can ask, and these might be things that you journal about as you're thinking about your sources. So, what was the purpose of the academic source? You're going to see from the authors what the purpose is, what the thesis statements are. Were they being theoretical, historical? Are they directly or indirectly responding to a perspective? And are they connecting to your research question? Of course, they didn't write with your research question in mind, but you want to see, are they working within your research question there? Then how current is the source? Technically, I always get this question, APA insists that sources be 5 or fewer years old. We aren't following that particular APA rule for honors in action. You can use older sources. The reason that the APA manual says sources should be 5 or fewer years old is that you're likely to get the most recent work if you're looking at newer sources. And you're going to get all those luscious footnotes and endnotes and information that the most recent sources have built on. So that's kind of nice that you're going to get the most recent information. The other thing, though, is that there are classics in the field. And so a source might be an older source. I mentioned one. I was talking with a chapter last month and mentioned Angela Davis's Women, Gender, and Class. That was written 35 years ago, I think. Don't quote me on that. Look at the date, but it's been a long time. It's a fabulous book. It's a classic. Davis was looking at issues of access and equality, many, many years ago, and it's a beautiful analysis. That's a classic in the field. Of course, you would want to use a book like that. And there are lots of classics, in different disciplines. So it's okay to use those books. There are reasons that they're classics and they have stood the test of time. Then you want to look, is there a detectable bias? Sometimes even professional journalists or scholars, you can tell what their bias is from reading through the information. If it's a detectable bias, does the author play fair and maybe present another side to the story? If not, you might want to steer away from the source, that if it's too biased. It's one of the reasons that we say that really most websites are not academic sources, because websites tend to be developed for very specific reasons, and they tend to have detectable biases. But you want to look at that. And how sound is the source? How well written is the source? If you open a source and there are all sorts of mistakes, close that source and use another one. There shouldn't be lots of spelling mistakes. There shouldn't be lots of grammatical errors. There are academic sources that are genuinely academic sources that are difficult to read through. That's where you might get coaches to help you analyze them. So when I say well written, I mean, looking at spelling and grammar. There are academic sources that, are kind of mystifyingly written. It's okay if it's mystifying. You just want to make sure that part of the vetting was that spelling and grammar were paid attention to. Let's go to the next slide, please. So here are lots of places to find them. Again, I'm going to really encourage you to work with your college's research librarians or your town's research librarians. They can really help. They know where to find academic sources. But there are lots of search engines. WorldCat is one of them. Google Scholar is a great resource. It's free, so I encourage you to use that one. There are open access journal websites. All of these things you may find that, and Google Scholar is a good example of this. You may find where you find a source and you want to see it, but it costs money to look at. ResearchGate, for example, tends to charge for journal articles. If that happens, get the citation and go to your library at the college or talk to your research librarian, because they can give you access to those sources. You don't have to pay for those typically. So if your library subscribes to the databases, you're going to be able to get those sources for free. So don't panic if you get you have to pay $50 for this article. You don't. You just need the help of your library database to do that. Another thing I want to mention about looking at sources, because you're going to use library databases. There's a part of the APA manual that says you don't have to use URLs to say in your citations to say where you got the information. But further back in the APA manual, it does say you need to have that DOI number. If you don't, so all of your sources need to be able to show where you got the source, so that somebody who is really interested in your research can go back and find it. So don't forget the DOI number. Most citations will have that, and you can copy and paste them actually. And then futurity it's really interested. If you're interested in cutting edge research and what's coming up next, this is a database for you. You might get the very newest stuff looking at this database, but this is not an exhaustive list. You can find information in lots of places when you're looking for academic sources. Talk to those research librarians if you haven't done that already. All right, developing research conclusions. I mentioned that sometimes chapters have difficulty with this, but there are really easy questions you can ask that you can write your notes about as you're journaling. But what did you learn? I mean, how simple is that? You're talking about what it is you learned. How did your investigation answer your research question? If you set that research question at the beginning, hopefully you've answered it in some way. And how did your research help you do that specifically? What varied sources did you use to contribute to what you learned? And so here's a place where you can really talk about here's how varied our sources were. We learned this from this source. We learned this other thing from this source. Here's, what we thought about it. You can write down the main points of your sources. So, what points did they make? Maybe what their thesis statements are. What are the main sort of points of their argument? You don't want to rewrite the book, of course, or the journal article, but you can get those points across. And what's the significance of the results of your investigation? This is the so what. So you did this work, you set your research question, you looked maybe at some inspiration sources, then you went to your academic sources, and you're writing about what you learned. So why did that make a difference? And a clue is that, of course, it's your research conclusions that are going to lead to your action. So you can write about, well, here's what we learned, and it mattered because it led us to this action. You want to always tie your honors study topic research to what you do as the action piece of your honors and action project. And then, what new ideas build off the top of it? Maybe you came up with some other ideas. It doesn't mean that you're doing original research, but you're scholars and you think about these things. And so you can always in your research conclusions, talk about that if you have new ideas that you've thought of from this. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. So it's only after you develop your research conclusions that you determine your action. You want to make sure you have those research conclusions in place before you do your action. Never, ever, ever, ever pick your action before you do the other parts of it. So remember at the beginning of this, I said, it's all about following the process. It isn't the biggest project. It's not the sexiest project. It's the project that really makes a case for having followed the honors and action process and really thinking through, reflecting on what you did. Here are some other things to consider as you're planning all of this and you're working through the process for honors and action. Remember, I mentioned that intentional research. As you're doing your journal, think about, well, how intentional was your research? What did you do that was intentional about it? You want to mention that as you're reflecting upon what you've done and you're going to write about it. Think about how working on an honors and action project really heightened your awareness of yourself, self and community in relation to global issues. I mentioned that, most of us are going to work locally, but we want you to consider the issues as they relate to the rest of the world as well. So how did you heighten your awareness there? How did you increase your appreciation for the value of informed action as a lifelong endeavor? So the whole idea is that informed action, the informed service, the whole purpose of honors and action. So don't forget that informed part. And how did you increase your appreciation for the value of informed action as a lifelong endeavor? You want to consider that. You'll want at the very end of this process to write about that in your Hallmark Award entry. And then I mentioned already the communication with collaborators. It's really important to have had a plan to communicate and to keep that communication flowing. The whole purpose of collaborators is to enhance your project, to help you build skills. So, or develop them. You may already have them, but your collaborators can help you with that and make the project better and really help you there. It's always a good thing maybe to do a one-page summary of how your project went or to share your honors and action Hallmark Award entry with your collaborators as part of that communication plan. And you can talk and write about that. Then, what were your team's contributions to understanding the honor study topic? First of all, you aren't doing, for the most part, original research. That's okay. But what did you learn about the art and science of play? What did you learn about the theme that you chose as it relates to the art and science of play? What did it contribute to you to do your research on with the inspirational sources and then moving to the academic sources, which are so important to this process? And then here's another lifelong thing here, understanding the importance of lifelong intentional service, and learning. So there's two places in the honors and action rubric talk about you and your appreciation for intentional service and lifelong learning. So pay attention to those things. And then you'll need quantitative and qualitative results for your honors and action project as well. And these can go back to your research, your action, and your collaboration objectives. You can reflect upon those and go back to them. But quantitative, it's all numbers. So it might be the numbers of people on the team, or the number of sources you used, or the number of collaborators, or the amount of money, the amount of flyers. I mean, there are lots of ways you can incorporate numbers into the quantitative reflection about your honors and action project. The qualitative results are the answers to a lot of questions that are on this slide. The whole idea of how you grew as scholars and leaders collectively. And so the qualitative stuff, it's the non-numbers part of really reflecting and analyzing how your project went. It could be the things you learned from doing the project. It could be the things, leadership lessons you learned from maybe having some bumps in the road during the project. There are lots of ways you can talk about this, and that's all good. So let's go to the next slide, please. We have resources. I mentioned that ptk.org/honors. We have the planning rubric. We have an Honors in Action workbook, which you can download and you can write in. You can follow the process with that workbook. We have a journaling guide. The brilliant Dr. Terry Ruckel wrote the questions for the journaling guide. She's an expert journaler. And the questions are really nice. So if you're not really sure where to start, look at the journaling guide and take a look at the questions that Dr. Ruckel wrote, and those are going to help you work through the process. We have a handout on developing a research question. We have an academic sources guide. If you're wondering what academic sources are, we've got the guide for you. Part of that is in the honors program guide, but it's also at ptk.org/honors. We do have film resources. The film resources tend to be inspiration sources, but they're lots of fun and there are lots of good films. And there are some documentaries on that film list that would qualify as academic sources. So take a look at that. We have Civic Scholar, Phi Theta Kappa's Journal of Undergraduate Research. Everybody always asks, well, can we take a look at what that last piece of an Honors in Action project, the write-up, looks like? We have lots of examples for you. So if you take a look at Civic Scholar, you're going to see a whole range of chapters, projects, and you'll see that even when a chapters are doing the same theme, how different the projects look. And so it's wonderful. The 2023 edition of Civic Scholar will be coming out in the next couple of months, and we've got some really wonderful examples there too. But we have 4 years of journals at ptk.org/honors. So take a look at those. I mentioned the Honors Case Study Challenge. The deadline is November 8th. And this is where you can use those inspiration sources, those newspaper articles, to really think about Honors in Action and the art and science of play. And we give 4 $500 scholarships either to individuals or chapters who write the most outstanding Honors Case Study Challenge entries. Take a look at that. It's a great way to get started with Honors in Action, but it's also a great way if you're just interested in the art and science of play to work on an entry, and you could be one of the people who's part of the parade of scholars at PTK Catalyst 2024, having won the Honors Case Study Challenge. Then Honors in Action grants, you can apply for up to $1,000 to help with your Honors in Action project. There are all sorts of things you can spend the money on. Take a look at the Honors in Action grants link at ptk.org/honors. It can't be used for food or conference registration or travel, but the Honors in Action grants, well, I mentioned the APA manual, but it can be used for honoraria for those coaches. It can be used for the types of supplies that you might use during a project. It can't be used for paper, for example, copy paper or printer ink, but it can be used for other types of supplies like books or little giveaways for your project, depending on what you're doing. Those resources can be used for things like hiring a web designer if you're going to work with websites, or a graphic designer if you want to professionalize your flyers or handouts. The sky's the limit. We would love to give your chapter an Honors in Action grant. The deadline is September 14th. It's not a long application, but you do have to have begun your Honors in Action journey. So take a look at it, September 14th, get those applications in. And then, of course, Research Edge, which is at getanedge.ptk.org. Research Edge is how to conduct academic research in general, but it follows the Honors in Action process. So highly recommend it as a tool to learn Honors in Action and learn about academic research. And you can earn the right to have some Research Edge bling and a ribbon for your name badge at PTK Catalyst 2024 by completing Research Edge. So highly recommend that. All right, so That is the very Susan Talking Fast version of how to begin with honors in action. Again, my name is Susan Edwards. My email address is susan.edwards@ptk.org. I'm happy to answer questions now. I'm happy to answer questions later. We have a whole student engagement team that can answer your questions about honors in action. We don't want this to be mysterious. We want you to grow as scholars and leaders. It's part of our mission. And it's very exciting for us. So I know we have a few minutes anyway. Are there any questions? Things that were mysterious or I haven't answered as I've gone through the process?
Is there anywhere we could find a more further breakdown on the themes? There's one specific theme that our chapter is having trouble with understanding. So what would your recommendation for that?
Well, have you read the theme introduction in the honors program guide? Shoot me a message, because it might be that we can just chat about the theme and what the honors program or honors program council is thinking. But of course, they couldn't put everything in the introduction. So I'm happy to chat with you or with the team on that. Questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Hey, so for theme 4, architecture and design of play. So I'll read the question and then I'll ask my question after I read that overarching statement.
Okay.
So in what ways do the design and structure of abstract and physical keywords, abstract and physical environments impact play? If our chapter is leaning towards, is it wrong, bad, or incorrect if we are leaning towards more of the physical environment aspect of that, or does it need to, we need to unite somehow abstract and physical? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Stephanie. It's really, in this case, one or the other,
Okay.
Most likely. I think the council is thinking about abstract for example, video games and how they're designed or how they play, or a game like Dungeons and Dragons and things. Physical architecture might be a concert hall or a museum or a playground. So it does not have to be both. It can be one or the other.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dee has a question.
Okay. Let's see, I can't
I was
see
looking
the whole-
over the honors and action grant, and it said we needed to have an annotated bibliography for the HIA Hallmark submission. Does that bibliography also need to be annotated?
Great question. Yes, it does. So take a look at Civic Scholar, because chapters do it in lots of different ways. And so, you're really looking at, as in the annotation, not a summary of the source, but why the source was important to your research. So why was it meaningful to your team as you were working through the honors and action process? That's why I recommend Civic Scholar, because chapters do it very well, and they do it very differently. Some chapters choose to have pretty long annotations there. And that's part of the research conclusions and things. You'll see some chapters really are writing 2 sentences. They've written much more about their research conclusions in paragraph form or narrative form in a different part of the entry. For the honors in action grant application, you just need 3 sources. We want you to at least have started this, and the annotations don't have to be long. I mean, right now, you may not know why those sources were meaningful to your research. So for the grant purpose, you're really writing about, what might be meaningful about it as you're moving forward. If you guys have done, if the team's done its research, you can turn in your annotations that you're going to use later for your honors in action Hallmark Award entry, but you don't need to be at that point yet. Most chapters haven't completed their research yet. Does that help? I hope I didn't muddy the water there.
Yeah, that did help.
Okay.
My next question is on the academic interviews. The 2 people that we're looking at interviewing on either a academic or an informal, both of them have master's degree. One of them has a master's degree in education. The other one just finished a master's degree. We're not entirely certain what the degree is in, but he has worked for a number of years for a local middle school as a behavioral interventionist.
Mm-hmm.
those be considered academic sources, or should we just stay with informal interviews?
They would be considered, it could be considered academic sources if you follow the academic interview process. It's the process that's academic. I'm going to recommend that they might be inspiration sources for you, that you talk with them about your research, or they might be really helpful as collaborators for the action part, depending on what you're doing as you get to your research conclusions. And say you want to work with a public school, they may at that point come in as collaborators. So it depends on where you are in the process and what you're doing. But if you're going to do academic interviews, get a coach to help you through the actual process. I will tell you that it's easier and faster for them to be inspiration sources. Not that I don't want you to learn the academic process for interviews, because that can be really, really important, particularly when you go on to graduate school and you do have to follow that process. But make sure if you're going to actually do that academic process, two things. One, that you have the time to do it. Get help doing it because you want to do it properly. And then also, when you do your honors and action hallmark award entry, make sure you write about the fact that you learned the academic interview process and how you utilized it, so that you're making very clear that those interviews were not inspiration interviews, they were academic interviews. You can write about your inspiration sources when you're writing about your research conclusions. You can talk about the fact that you used inspiration sources and then they led you to your academic sources, and here's what you learned from them. That's perfectly acceptable as well. Just don't put those sources in the bibliography of 8 sources.
Okay, so we only use eight actual sources in the bibliography.
Yeah, you only have room for 8 sources. You do want to use 8. I will mention that definitely, because that makes the strongest case for you that you've done that research, but only 8. Many chapters use many more. And again, you can write about those in your research conclusions as well as the sources you actually used. You're making your case for having done your research when you're writing the Honors and Action Hallmark Award entry.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And yeah, we probably have time for another question if there is one.
Susan, I'd like to ask about the modalities. Do you have to have one academic source from each of the 5 modalities? Is that recommended?
Yeah, it's a great question, and no, the answer is no. You have to have 8 academic sources. They can be from a single modality. The Honors Program Council, when they wrote that, they just wanted everybody to have an understanding that there are multiple modalities and you can look at academic sources in many different ways. So no, you can do 1, you can do 2. It's up to you, but you do not have to do all of them.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Good. Great. Well, please, again, susan.edwards@ptk.org. If you've got questions, I'm happy to answer your questions, happy to help. I know the entire student engagement team is happy to do that as well. We appreciate that you are working with Honors in Action. That strengthens, hopefully, you and your skills. It gives you a lot for your resume. It strengthens Phi Theta Kappa. You make us look good, and we appreciate you very much. And I'm going to turn it back over to our fearless leader, Patty Van Adder.
Hey, thanks, Susan. Well, thanks everybody for coming today. I know some of you have joined us for a couple of hours yesterday and then an hour today. So you have gotten in a lot of PTK learning this week. So thank you. Thanks for coming. What we're going to do takes us about 24 hours. We'll process the video. And this particular video and the PowerPoint will be available on Get an Edge at ptk.org. You'll scroll down to the Phi Theta Kappa Programs Resources section of that, and you will see a section labeled Honors in Action, and you will, it'll be placed there. There are other sessions that we have done throughout the beginning of this year and some from last year that are still applicable. So feel free to peruse the resources. And like Susan said, if you have any questions about Honors in Action, you can contact her or myself, and I'll make sure she gets the question, because she's the Honors in Action person in our department, but we're at least able to help as much as we can. So thanks again for coming. If you don't have any other questions, we'll be seeing you soon. Thank you. Happy researching.
Thank you.
If you need the slides in PDF form, I'll make sure I upload those.
No, I just use
Okay.
it like this.